Hello everyone. In today's video, I just want to explain my thought process behind the runes I take and why you've been seeing me spam Aftershock compared to Grasp, and also clear up some misconceptions about secondary runes like Sudden Impact or Scorch. I'm going to be explaining it in depth in this video, so let's get into it. Starting things off with Cassante's Keystone runes, you might be thinking that Grasp is Cassante's best rune because of how he auto-attacks and it goes well with his passive, but that's actually not the case. Aftershock is actually Cassante's best rune by far, 100%, there is no question about it. Aftershock synergizes with Cassante super well, and I'm actually going to tell you why. Now, if you take a look at Cassante's scalings on his abilities, you can actually see he has resistance scalings on his passive, his Q, and his W. But we want to look at his Q, because this is where all the magic happens in laning phase and trading. So when you get resistances on Cassante, the cast time on his Q is lowered, the cooldown on his Q is also lowered, and the damage is increased exponentially with resistances. Now, the nice thing about Aftershock, it doesn't just give you armor or magic resist, it gives you both, and Cassante scales with both of armor and magic resist. Basically meaning, in laning phase, when you proc Aftershock, your Q cooldown is lowered a lot, the cast time is lowered a lot, and the damage is increased a lot. And it gets better. The reason Aftershock is so incredibly valuable is because it allows you to tank so much damage not only in team fights, but laning phase as well. You have so many safety nets with Aftershock, it's a nightmare for your opponent to try and trade back into you. Let's take Riven for example. She Qs into you and you press W, and then she gets stunned for 1.5 seconds, let's say. That's enough, that procs Aftershock, and it lowers everything on your Q and lowers the cooldown and the cast time, and the damage gets increased significantly. You auto W, guaranteed from the stun, and then since the Q cooldown is lowered again, that lets you get off another Q, and once she gets unstunned, you can just E out. So during that entire trade for Riven, you were taking reduced damage from your W, and then she got stunned, and then she took a buttload of damage because your Q's damage scales with the resists, and then once she gets unstunned, she fights back only to realize your Aftershock is still up and you're taking reduced damage, and then you just E out with a shield and a dash. It's a nightmare for your opponent to trade into, and it's even better if you're against a ranged opponent, because let's take Smolder for example. They're very squishy, but they can keep a good amount of distance between you. So what you do is you wait for them to walk near a minion, and you press E on the minion, and then during the E dash you press W, which charges the W during the dash, and then that procs Aftershock, and they basically take 1 billion damage from your Q, since your Q damage scales with damage, or your Q damage scales with resists, and now they're forced to run from you, and it's just a winning trade. They can't trade back. It's wonderful. I would go as far as to say that Aftershock can be taken into literally almost every matchup. This rune is just good into tanks, it's good into ranged matchups, it's good into melee brawlers, it's good for everything. Now Grasp is also good, but you're missing out on a ton of value if you're not taking Aftershock. There are like a few tiny matchups where I think Grasp outvalues Aftershock a little bit, like Scion, where you can just stack health a lot, but I would say Aftershock is your bread and butter for your main Keystone rune. So next up, I actually want to clear up some misconceptions about Conqueror. On old Cassante, Conqueror made quite a lot of sense, is because his Q had attack damage scaling, his W got attack damage scaling, and you could stack it up relatively quickly. However, on the new Cassante, you don't have any attack damage scalings. Let me repeat that. New Cassante has 0 attack damage scalings, meaning you do not get any value from going this rune. It incentivizes you to have a longer trade, and to be honest, Cassante's sweet spot for trading is roughly 1 to 2, maybe 3 seconds, and then you want to leave, but Conqueror incentivizes you to just go all in, and that is not what Cassante wants, making this rune very bad. Do not ever go this rune. The last Keystone rune I want to talk about is actually Spellbook. Now, I cooked up Spellbook at the start of the rework because with the new rework, I just saw Cassante as a massive stat check, big, bulky damage tank that didn't really have much mobility or utility, so I figured Spellbook would fill in those gaps, and it worked very nicely for me. I really liked Spellbook. It's a pretty good rune page. However, similar to Grasp, I feel like it just gets outvalued by Aftershock just because of how much synergy Cassante has with Aftershock. I think this rune isn't as good anymore, but it's still definitely viable. However, it just is outvalued by Aftershock. Now let's talk about the secondary runes. Now, Cassante has a lot of flexibility when it comes to secondary runes, so I want to clear up some misconceptions that I've been seeing about them. So first up, we have the Precision Tree. I think the Precision Tree is gonna come last place compared to every other secondary tree that I've seen. I think this page is just kind of overrated. It doesn't give Cassante value in any sort of way, and to be honest, I just don't like it. It doesn't give you what you want in the later stages of the game. Next up, we have the Sorcery tree. And similar to the Precision tree, I think this page isn't as good just because it fills in unnecessary holes that don't need to be filled on Cassante. Now, the reason you're seeing me not like the Precision and the Sorcery rune pages are because Cassante does not have any mana problems. Once you reach the top level of Cassante, you will understand that managing mana becomes very simple. Just don't spam your Q early game and you become manaless once you press R. So it really just comes down to, are you able to not press Q as often? Are you able to last hit with just auto attacks? And for very, very mastered Cassante players, they can do this easily, but for beginner Cassante players, they might have to Q auto to last hit consistently, so I can see where having a little bit more mana can be useful. However, I personally don't recommend this page. Next up, we have the Domination page. Now, this actually used to be one of my favorite rune pages, and I still stand by it. I think this page is really nice to have. The sudden impact true damage for engaging with E is nice. The Ultimate Hunter giving you more uptime on being efficient around the map is really, really nice. However, I think this rune page lost a little bit of value with the new rework just because Cassante is now a beast in his tank form. And why that's important is because old Cassante, you were heavily reliant on your ult to be useful, which is why Ultimate Hunter gave you a lot of value. But new Cassante, you're not necessarily punished as much for having your ultimate on cooldown in a fight, which is why I think having your ultimate always available just lost a little bit of value. But all in all, I think this page is good. However, I don't run it as much just because I don't think I need the extra damage from sudden impact, and Ultimate Hunter isn't necessarily I need it up every single minute in the game. Last but not least, we have the Inspiration page. This is one of my favorite pages. I would say that Inspiration and Domination are relatively the same value on Cassante. It really comes down to preference, but I enjoy Inspiration a lot because it gives me a lot of utility and value that Cassante misses out on. Typically, I like to run Magical Footwear, which allows me to ignore boots early game and just full focus on getting resists. And then I also like to have Approach Velocity because Cassante has a lot of slows up very often. They brought the RQ slow back, so having Approach Velocity just really helps Cassante's stickiness power. And the Inspiration page can be flexed in different ways. If you want Cosmic Insight instead, that's also totally viable and fine. And if you're against a tough matchup where you think you're going to get poked out a lot, like Aurora or a Teemo, then Biscuits are also a great option to help you survive that rough laning phase. So let's do a quick recap. Conqueror is bad. Unsealed Spellbook, not as good anymore. Aftershock is going to be your best bet. Precision Tree is not that good. However, if you struggle with managing your mana early on, then running Presence of Mind or Mana Flow Band can help, but once you get on the higher stages of Keystones, managing your mana pool is going to be a skill you need to learn, and you no longer really need to have a mana solver in your runes anymore. Sudden Impact Ultimate Hunter is a great secondary rune page to go, and so is Footwear, Velocity, Cosmic Insight, or Biscuits. Any combination of those is also a great idea. Now, if you're wondering, okay, Aatreus, what rune page should I just go every game? I don't want to think about who I'm against, what I should do. I just want to go rune page where I don't have to think about anything. And it's very straightforward. Just go Aftershock, Shield Bash, Second Wind, Overgrowth, and then you can go Boots, Velocity. I run this page almost 99% of the time. I take Attack Speed, Scaling Health, and Tenacity. Obviously, these can be flexed. If you have an Enchanter, I really like taking Revitalize. If you know you can win laning phase, I like to take Demolish. If you're against a Tryndamere or a set where you won't really get much value at a Second Wind, you can run Bone Plating. If you're against a rough matchup like Teemo, Cassiopeia, Aurora, where you're going to get poked out a lot in laning phase, and you're not going to be queuing them as much, so you won't get as much value from Approach Velocity, you can swap out Approach Velocity for Biscuits. And of course, if the enemy team doesn't have that much CC, you can grab more health scaling. However, in 95% of the games, I always take Tenacity and Sword Resist, just because being able to move is a very, very key asset on Keystones. And Tenacity is quite a hard stat to get. But yeah, that just about wraps up the 14.22 Keystones rune guide. If you have any questions, please let me know below, and thank you for watching.